Hey little dreamers! Ready for a magical bedtime adventure? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a sleepy tale. Let's go! Once upon a time, in a castle stitched into the clouds with silk banners and sapphire roofs, there lived a princess who could not sit still during royal banquets, but could sit for hours with her nose buried in a book. Princess Mirella was not like the others. While her sisters learned embroidery and how to smile just enough but not too much, Mirella memorized myths, traced maps of forgotten empires, and hid novels under her silk pillows. The court whispered, "She walks like a question mark," one courtier sighed, always bent over some parchment. The queen worried she would never marry well. The king muttered that books were for scholars, not sovereigns. But Mirella didn't care. The stories were alive. The characters whispered to her through candlelight and crinkled pages. They were funny and bold and tragic and wild, and they made her feel less alone. While other princesses twirled in ballroom gowns, Mirella once accidentally wore an inkwell ring to a formal dinner. One gray afternoon, while escaping a dull etiquette lesson, she wandered down a corridor she'd never noticed before. The floor creaked underfoot, and the walls seemed to sigh with age. At the end was a thick wooden door with an iron latch, half hidden by a tapestry of a unicorn reading a scroll. How had she never seen this before? She pressed her hand against the door. It was cold, heavy, the kind of door that begged you not to open it, but whispered that maybe you should. With one slow breath, Mirella pulled. The door groaned open like a dragon stretching after a 1,000-year nap. Beyond it lay dust, darkness, and silence. The scent hit her first. Aged parchment, old wood, forgotten dreams. Her slippers sank slightly into a faded red carpet, thick with time. Shafts of light poured through tall, grime-streaked windows, illuminating a room so vast it swallowed sound. Shelves towered like trees, rows upon rows of them, some cracked, some crooked, most still filled with books. Mirella's heart fluttered like the pages that whispered from a breeze leaking through a broken windowpane. She stepped inside, her breath held like a secret. A chandelier drooped from the ceiling above, long dead of flame but elegant still, like a ghost of grandeur. Scrolls lay unrolled on tables, long since abandoned mid-thought. Inkpots sat dry. A globe of the world spun slowly on its own. It was the royal library. She'd heard rumors from old tutors that the library had been shut down decades ago, deemed a waste when knowledge could be summoned with coin or magic. No one needed books anymore, they'd said. She now saw that those people were wrong. Each book seemed to hum, not with magic, but with memory. And she felt something strange. Not just awe but responsibility. Like the library had been waiting for her. She climbed a spiral staircase, ran her fingers across cracked spines, some still bearing royal seals. She found a dusty chair and sank into it. Her dress puffed out around her like a story about to be told. That night, she read by moonlight through a stained glass window. Just one chapter, then another, and another. Outside, the castle continued without her. But inside, a kingdom of forgotten stories opened its arms and let her in. The next night, Mirella returned with a lantern tucked beneath her cloak and breadcrumbs in her pocket. She slipped past the yawning guards, whose spears were far more alert than they were, and tiptoed down the now familiar corridor. The door greeted her with a softer groan this time, almost like a welcome. Inside, the air was thick with whispers, not voices exactly, but that peculiar hush that fills a room full of books, as if every story was holding its breath. The lantern light flickered across the walls, casting dancing shadows behind the shelves. The books seemed to lean toward her now, their cracked spines arching like stretching cats. She spoke to them. Not aloud, just in her head. What secrets do you hold? What wonders have you seen? And though they didn't answer, they didn't push her away either. She wandered deeper than before, past the history of ancient wars, past maps of lands no longer on any chart, past shelves labeled in languages no one had spoken in centuries. Then she found it. A corner where the books were thin and soft, with painted covers and big, friendly letters. Children's books. Mirella knelt, brushed dust from a tiny tale about a hedgehog who sailed the sea in a teacup. She smiled. It was the first book she'd ever loved. She remembered it now, her mother reading it to her by the fire. She sat down on the rug right there, legs tucked under her, and read it again. The hours passed unnoticed. The silence wasn't empty. It was alive somehow. The stories didn't just sit on the shelves. They waited. They listened. They longed to be heard. And that night, as she locked the door behind her, Mirella knew. The library wasn't just forgotten. It was lonely. Mirella became a shadow at night, a whisper on stone. Each evening after the castle dimmed, she slipped through halls like a rumor in silk slippers, carrying cleaning cloths and old lamp oil in her satchel. The royal maids thought she was working on embroidery in the music room. They would have fainted if they'd seen her on hands and knees, scrubbing ink stains from oak tabletops. The library became hers, secretly, sacredly. She began with the basics. Dusting shelves, sweeping floors, re-inking quills. She stitched torn covers with gold thread meant for gowns, polished globes with the hem of her dress, and learned how to bind pages by candlelight. A ledger appeared on the desk one night, and she started logging each book she repaired. But it wasn't all work. There were indulgent hours of reading, tales of gods disguised as beggars, of time-traveling cats, of spells hidden in lullabies. She laughed, gasped, even cried silently into the folds of her cloak. These weren't just books, they were portals, and she leapt through them nightly. Soon the space began to change. Dust didn't settle as thick. The chandelier's frame gleamed faintly. The hush of the room softened, like it was breathing easier. One night, she found a box of library cards, yellowed, brittle, with names of long-ago readers. Most were commoners, children even. That startled her. She'd always assumed the library had been only for royals. But once, long ago, it had been open to all. Mirella traced her fingers over the names. Her heart quickened. Maybe it could be again. She placed a fresh candle by the reading nook. Then another. She laid out 3 books meant for little hands. She wasn't sure who she was preparing for, but something in her knew. Someone was coming. It began with a giggle. Quick. Definitely not imaginary. Mirella froze mid-page, her candle flickering dangerously as she scanned the darkened library. Nothing but shelves and shadow. She waited. Then, another giggle. Louder. Closer. And this time a whisper. Shoo! She's real. Out from behind a shelf tumbled 2 children, mud on their knees, cheeks flushed, eyes wide with wonder. A boy no older than 8, and a girl with braids and one missing shoe. Mirella blinked. Are you a ghost? The boy asked, more hopeful than scared. I don't think so, she replied, smiling. Are you? They explained in hushed voices. They'd been playing near the castle gardens when they noticed a soft light coming from a high window. Curious, they followed the glow, climbed ivy like pirates, and found an open window on the 3rd floor, directly into the library. Mirella should have reported them. That's what a princess would do. But instead, she said, "Would you like a story?" They nodded so fast their heads blurred. She led them to the rug, chose The Hedgehog in a Teacup Tale, and began to read. More children came the next night. And the next. Word spread like jam on toast. The castle library is alive. Mirella never asked how they got in. Some climbed, some sneaked, one appeared through a dumbwaiter, but she made room each time. She read aloud, giving voices to dragons and whispers to ghosts. The children laughed, gasped, leaned in. Sometimes they brought her flowers or crusts of bread wrapped in napkins. One left a drawing of her on the desk, stick limbs and a glowing crown made of books. She never told the king, never told the queen. But inside the forgotten wing of the castle, night after night, the stories had an audience again. By week 3, the children began arriving early, before Mirella had even lit the lamps. She'd find them curled in windowsills, dangling their legs from balconies, or curled beneath tables with dog-eared books already in hand. One bold boy even claimed his reading cushion with a shoe, left there like a flag of conquest. With her double life now in full swing, Mirella juggled more than fairy tales. By day, she still had to endure royal schedules, lessons in politics, dress fittings, and dinners with visiting dignitaries. By night, she was wrangling curious children, restocking books, and deciphering hand-scribbled notes that read things like, "Do dragons eat soup?" Some nights, things got wonderfully out of hand. Once someone brought a goat. Another time, 2 children acted out an entire pirate battle using paper swords and candlesticks. A third evening, a little girl spilled berry jam over a century-old map of the known world. Mirella nearly wept, but she couldn't bring herself to scold. Instead, she began laying down gentle rules, which she dubbed library laws. No goats, hands clean before page turning. Every story deserves quiet ears and open hearts. The children helped enforce them, proudly pointing to a scroll by the entrance where the rules were scribbled in crooked letters and glitter glue. The nights grew longer. The reading rug frayed with love. Mirella's voice, once soft with shyness, now filled the library with character, cadence, and warmth. And as much as she gave, the children gave back tenfold, with questions, laughter, sticky hugs, and the most priceless thing of all, trust. Mirella began to realize something. She wasn't just restoring a room of books. She was building a world where anyone could belong. The dust, once a stubborn guest, began to vanish like bad dreams at sunrise. Under Mirella's touch, and the small, eager hands of her nightly visitors, the library was transforming. They scrubbed, they sorted, they discovered broom closets full of forgotten paint tins and chose new colors for the walls. Deep blue for the sky, sunflower yellow for the sun, and a cozy green like soup, according to one 5-year-old with very specific taste. The chandelier, long thought beyond hope, gleamed again after hours of polishing with vinegar and velvet rags. They lit it with enchanted candles donated by a merchant's son, who claimed his father would never notice. The shelves stood prouder now, some freshly sanded and oiled with lavender polish that made the whole room smell like a forest nap. Mirella began a bring-a-book tradition. If you had a book to spare, donate it. If you didn't, take one anyway. A nobleman's daughter brought 3 volumes of underwater poetry. A baker's apprentice offered a flower-streaked cookbook full of hand-drawn pie diagrams. One boy brought a single page, half-burned, torn, but Mirella treated it like treasure. She framed it. The children came not only to read but to help. They categorized books by smell, by size, by likelihood of involving sword fights. Some learned to mend pages, others practiced storytelling, taking turns reading aloud to the group. One shy girl began translating fairy tales from a forgotten dialect. The library became more than a secret. It became a project, a home. And while Mirella still kept her role hidden from the court, something inside her had shifted. She wasn't just sneaking away anymore. She was stepping into something real, something hers. Not a throne. Purpose. One rainy evening, a carriage arrived at the castle, slick with mud and wrapped in mystery. It bore the royal crest of a neighboring kingdom, and out stepped Prince Holden, tall, stiff, and wearing the exact expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Mirella met him during dinner, seated politely at his left while her father praised trade routes and her mother discussed velvet exports. Holden nodded, smiled awkwardly, and said nothing of interest. But the next day, Mirella spotted him again, alone in the rose garden, frowning at a book upside down. She tilted her head. Is it a particularly difficult story? Or is the plot walking backward? He flushed. I was inspecting the binding. Eventually, under the pressure of a raised brow and a mischievous grin, he confessed. He couldn't read. Not well anyway. Words swam on the page, tangled and mocking. His tutors had given up years ago, assuming a prince had other strengths. Mirella saw something then. Not shame but hunger. He wanted to read. No one had ever shown him how. That night, she left a candle burning low in the library and cracked the window by the hedgehog shelf. Holden came. She started him on picture books, with one-syllable rhymes and soft illustrations. He read out loud, tripping on words but laughing at the jokes. Sometimes she read with him. Sometimes she simply listened. Within weeks, he was tackling longer stories, ones with heroes who also struggled but still found treasure at the end. He never told anyone. Neither did she. And though Mirella didn't love him, he was far too fond of beet soup. She did admire his bravery. Not the sword-fighting kind. The kind where you admit you're still learning and walk into a story anyway. It was bound to happen. Whispers, like mice in velvet slippers, made their way from the castle halls to the queen's ears. She'd always known her daughter was different. But lately, Mirella had become suspiciously cheerful. Her gowns came back with ink stains. She skipped harp lessons, and once excused herself early from a royal luncheon, mumbling something about a goat and overdue parchment. The queen summoned her with a look that could curdle milk. They sat in the solarium, surrounded by potted orchids and politely dying conversation. Mirella, the queen said, with the tone of someone preparing to mention something unspeakably scandalous. There are rumors. Mirella blinked innocently. About Prince Holden's beet soup obsession. The queen didn't laugh. About you disappearing at night. Mirella considered denying everything. But her hands were still stained with berry jam and charcoal sketches. So instead she sighed. There's something I want to show you, she said quietly. And she did. That evening, just as the sky bruised into violet, Mirella led her mother down the corridor behind the unicorn tapestry. She opened the door, lit the lanterns, and stepped aside. Queen walked in. Children peeked from between shelves. A toddler with gap teeth waved. One girl stood reading aloud from a book twice her size. The chandelier glowed. Laughter bounced off stone. The queen stood very still. Then, she walked to the nearest shelf and pulled down a copy of Royal Flora and Fauna, Volume 1. She opened it. Blinked. This was mine, she murmured. I thought it was lost. She looked at Mirella, really looked. And while her brow remained arched, like it had a permanent lease, her voice softened. Tell me everything. So Mirella did. And the queen didn't shut it down. She stayed for story time. The king did not knock. He simply appeared one night, wrapped in a robe too fine for sneaking and wearing a scowl that suggested he'd rather be inspecting battle plans than following whispers down dusty corridors. Mirella, midway through reading The Onion Knight and the Sniffling Sorcerer, froze mid-sentence as he stepped into the flickering lantern light. The children gasped. One dropped a cookie. Mirella stood slowly, her heart pounding. "Father," she said, her voice trembling. He surveyed the room, the children on cushions, the lit chandelier, the scrolls pinned to the walls, the rule chart, still declaring no goats and glitter. His eyes landed on a shelf labeled "Very Excellent Sword Fights," and also kisses. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked, not loudly, but with the weight of a stone door. Mirella took a breath. "It's the library. I restored it. For everyone. For commoners. In the royal wing." "Yes," was long one. Long enough for a small boy to sneeze. The king stepped toward the center of the room. He picked up a book, Tales of the Nine-Legged Fox. He flipped through the pages, frowning. Then with a sigh he sat down, right in the middle of the reading circle. "Go on," he said. "Let's hear how the onion fellow survives this time." Mirella blinked. The children squealed. She resumed reading, voice steadier now, rising with laughter and suspense. Afterward he stood. "This is not entirely improper," he muttered, clearing his throat. "Though we must ensure structural safety. And rules. Proper ones." Mirella nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty." But as he turned to leave, she caught the smallest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Close. That night, the king didn't order the library closed. He asked for the next chapter. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of day where the clouds loitered like gossipers and the wind couldn't decide if it wanted to behave. Rain had come in hard and sideways, and the children arrived dripping wet, wrapped in cloaks that smelled like puddles and sheep. Mirella lit every lantern and laid out towels, tucking books into dry corners and herding her damp, giggling audience toward story time. And then the ceiling groaned. A crack, faint but unmistakable, spidered across the upper beam above the reading rug. Mirella's heart stuttered. Then came a drip. Then two. Clack. Beam sagged. Plaster rained down. The chandelier flickered. The children screamed. Mirella moved fast, her voice sharper than ever before. Away from the rug now. She herded them beneath the balcony, shielding them with her arms until the dust settled. No one was hurt, just shaken. The room went silent. They couldn't stay. Not like this. Mirella canceled storytime that night. Sent them home early. Stood in the center of the room alone, watching water trickle down onto a pile of soggy books. She expected to return the next evening to silence. But she didn't. Instead, the next day brought a line. Farmers, cobblers, cooks, and even a few shy nobles stood outside the side gate, holding ladders, hammers, and bundled tarps. "We heard," they said. "We brought what we could." Children arrived carrying nails. A baker's wife offered warm bread and buckets. A stonemason inspected the beams and declared, "It'll hold with care." The library, once a secret, now belonged to all of them. Under Mirella's direction, they worked by lantern light, patched the ceiling, reinforced the shelves, repaired what had cracked, not just in the walls, but in the story of the kingdom itself. A royal couldn't fix it alone, but a community could. The parchment trembled only slightly as Mirella signed her name. She'd rewritten it 3 times, each version more defiant than the last, until she finally found the right balance of elegance and rebellion. It was titled, "A Modest Proposal for the Revival and Public Integration of the Royal Library." It was technically a decree. Not that she had the authority to issue one, but she knew the language. Her royal tutors had drilled that much into her, and she dressed her boldest ideas in velvet prose. Her favorite line read, "Let stories no longer be locked behind stone and title. Let ink be as noble as blood." She presented it at dinner, waited until the pheasant was carved and the mood was bland. The king read it in silence. The queen tapped her fork once, a slow, deliberate clink. Prince Holden choked softly on a spoonful of something orange. Mirella waited. At last, the king looked up. "You've taken quite a risk," he said. "This would mean opening royal grounds to people," Mirella offered. "To everyone," he corrected, though the word sounded less scandalous than it might have weeks ago. The queen sipped her tea. "You argue well. Perhaps too well." But they didn't say no. So she made copies and posted them on palace doors in town squares, outside bakeries and beside fountains. In corners of the kingdom where no decree had ever mattered, people stopped and read. Some scoffed, some stared, and some, with calloused fingers and tired eyes, nodded slowly. The decree didn't just open the library. It opened a door. For children who had never crossed castle walls. For adults who thought stories were a luxury. For a kingdom long trained to keep knowledge gated behind gold. It opened that door, and didn't lock it behind them. The first Kingdom Book Fair was, in every measurable way, a delightful disaster. Mirella had imagined something quaint. Tables beneath fluttering pennants, children sharing favorite passages, a mild crowd nibbling tea cakes. What she got was chaos dressed in bunting. Books flew. Literally. A magician's apprentice misfired a levitation charm and sent a stack of encyclopedias swirling through the sky like startled pigeons. Caramel apples melted over ledgers. A tiny bard duo insisted on singing every chapter of The Tale of the Turnip Prince, and refused to be stopped. But oh, what joy! Vendors came with hand-bound journals, ink pots in shades of midnight and moonlight, and scrolls so old they smelled of thunder. Children wore paper crowns and tote bags that read, "I'd rather be in a story." One toddler wandered into the poetry tent and left an hour later reciting rhymes about frogs and justice. Mirella floated through it all, managing emergencies, soothing tantrums, catching falling pamphlets, and occasionally sneaking a bite of roasted chestnut. Holden ran a read-aloud for grown-ups corner with all the flair of someone who discovered chapter books last month and never looked back. The Queen arrived mid-afternoon, cloaked and anonymous. She purchased a biography of an urchin-turned-navigator and left a note that read, "Reminds me of someone." At sunset, just as the booksellers began packing up and the children collapsed into story-dazed heaps, a boy handed Mirella a crumpled note. It said simply, "I used to hate reading. Now I love it more than dragons." She folded it, kept it in her pocket. The fair hadn't gone according to plan. Had gone better. The library was no longer a secret. It was a celebration. Sticky, loud, chaotic, and entirely magical. She noticed the girl by her silence. Among the chatter and laughter, there she sat, barefoot on the steps of the library, arms wrapped around her knees, a book pressed tightly to her chest. Her dress was patched at the elbows, her hair wild with wind, but her eyes were fierce, observant, hungry. Mirella approached slowly. "You've been here before," she said gently. "Haven't you?" The girl nodded but said nothing. She held out the book like a peace offering. It was a battered volume of myths, held together by string and determination. Mirella flipped it open and saw careful handwriting in the margins. Corrections, questions, even jokes. In a different world, the girl might have been a scholar already. "What's your name?" Mirella asked. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Lonnie." "Did you write these notes, Lonnie?" She nodded again. Then, "I come after everyone leaves. I didn't think I could stay." Mirella sat beside her. "You can. You belong here as much as anyone. Lonnie looked down at her calloused feet. Even without shoes. Especially without shoes, Mirella said, smiling. From that day forward, Lonnie became a quiet pillar of the library. She didn't just read, she devoured. She repaired spines, sorted scrolls, and asked the kinds of questions that made Mirella pause and rethink everything. When a younger child struggled with letters, it was Lonnie who sat beside them patiently, sounding out each syllable. When a boy mocked another for reading slowly, Lonnie handed him a book upside down and said, "Let's see how you do." Mirella watched her blossom, barefoot and bold, her voice growing louder with every chapter. Lonnie reminded her why she'd started all this. Not for perfection, not for praise, but for people like her. Readers who had waited too long to be seen. The library no longer whispered, hummed, giggled, occasionally burped, usually thanks to a merchant's son who never arrived without snacks. What had once been a room of silence now thrummed with life. Students sprawled across cushions reciting spells. Travelers traded maps, annotated with riddles. Artists sketched characters from stories, pinning their work along the walls with crooked pride. The books themselves seemed livelier too. Pages flipped with eagerness. Spines no longer cracked. They stretched like old friends roused from sleep. Even the air smelled richer. Ink, fresh parchment, lavender polish, and the faintest hint of melted wax. Mirella no longer had to do everything alone. There were now volunteers, young and old, trained to guide readers, organize shelves, and gently confiscate snacks when necessary. Though exceptions were made for cheese rolls. Always. One evening, a local tinker arrived with a donation, a wheeled ladder that sang softly when rolled. Thought it'd cheer the place up, he shrugged. Did. Everyone now referred to it as Miss Ladderly. Meanwhile, Lonnie had started her own story circle, drawing crowds with her firm voice and sharper wit. Halden introduced a reading duel game. Loser had to act out a scene in character. Mirella watched a duke flail about pretending to be a lovesick turnip. It was glorious. And every now and then, strangers wandered in. A woman from the coast who'd heard whispers of a castle library open to all. A farmer with a family of 7, each child clinging to a borrowed book. A visiting prince who left with a beginner's guide to grammar gremlins and a new appreciation for semicolons. The shelves were never still. And neither was Mirella. Because this wasn't a hobby or a phase. This was a revolution with bookmarks. Then one night no one came. Not one creaky boot. Not one eager face pressed to the stained glass window. The library sat in perfect, echoing stillness. The cushions were untouched. The scrolls unrolled. Miss Ladderly, unusually quiet, stood parked beside a shelf of books that hadn't been borrowed in days. Mirella waited. First an hour. Then 2. Paced. Reshelved a few out-of-place volumes. Lit extra candles. Checked the gate 3 times. Nothing. A strange unease crept in. Not fear exactly, but doubt. Had the magic run out? Had people moved on? Had the stories become unnecessary? She walked slowly between the shelves, brushing her fingers along the spines. The warmth was still there, but muffled. Drowsy. She found herself in the children's corner, sitting on the rug that now had a worn patch shaped like a sleepy dog. She opened the Hedgehog in a Teacup book, her first favorite. But even its charm felt dimmer tonight. What if this was it? A brief, lovely spark already fading. A storm rumbled outside. Rain began tapping against the glass in a rhythm too familiar. Like footsteps. For a second her heart lifted. But it was just rain. She stayed for another hour. Then blew out the lanterns. folded a blanket, straightened a stack of books no one had touched. Before leaving, she placed the hedgehog book back on its shelf and whispered, "We'll try again tomorrow." The door creaked closed behind her. And the library exhaled. Quiet. Waiting. Not empty, just paused. Sometimes even the brightest stories take a breath. The letter was tucked inside a book she'd passed over a dozen times before. The Encyclopedia of Unusual Occupations, Volume 2. Dream Polishers to Dung Sculptors. It slipped out with a soft flutter when she opened to a random page on cloud weavers. Cream-colored parchment. Faint scent of lavender. Ink that danced between elegant and hurried. It read, "Dear Princess, or Librarian, or both. You don't know me. Not yet. But I know you. You taught my sister to read. You gave my brother a book when he didn't know what he needed. You read to me once about a knight with a bent sword who still saved the day. You made me believe that stories weren't just for people with gold buttons and last names that end in the third. I haven't been to the library in a while. Life's busy, work's loud. But the stories I found there haven't left me. They wait behind my eyes when the world is too heavy. So if it's quiet now, if the shelves feel lonely, know this. The silence doesn't mean they've forgotten you. It means they're out there carrying your stories forward, living them, sharing them. And some of us are coming back soon. Someone who still believes in hedgehogs and teacups. Mirella read it 3 times. By the 4th she was smiling. She slipped the letter into her pocket, stood tall, and rang the tiny silver bell near the entrance that rarely got used. It echoed through the halls, bright and warm. And by the next evening 2 children returned. Then 5. Then 12. They came back like birds to spring. One even brought cookies. Because sometimes silence isn't an ending. It's just the page before the next chapter. It began as a joke. Lonnie, ever bold, had perched herself atop a book cart and declared, "Behold, Princess Mirella, Queen of Quiet, Duchess of Dust." The children howled. Someone tossed a paper crown her way. An old map folded and scribbled with ink. She wore it all afternoon. But the name stuck. Not as mockery but as something true. Soon after, the king made it official. He summoned Mirella to the throne room, where courtiers shifted nervously and the herald cleared his throat far too many times. But the king didn't give her a title of marriage or land. He gave her the key to the library. A real one, carved from brass and shaped like an open book. The royal librarian, he said, and keeper of knowledge for the realm. There was applause. Real applause. Even the queen clapped, 3 times sharply like punctuation. But what stunned them all was what Mirella said next. She handed the key back. "I'll accept the role," she said. "But not as a princess. Not from a throne." And with that she stepped down, literally. Removed her circlet. Folded her silk gloves. Declined future court obligations with a thank you note written on parchment that smelled faintly of peppermint. She kept the title of librarian. She moved into a small room above the library. Modest, dusty, perfect. The children helped her paint the walls. Miss Ladderly got a gold ribbon. Lonnie organized a shelf in alphabetical order and then messed it up again, just for fun. Mirella no longer belonged to court or crown. She belonged to the library, to its people, to the hundreds, no thousands, of stories still waiting to be discovered. A throne is a lonely place. But a reading nook, that's where revolutions begin. The movement spread like a spilled inkwell across parchment. At first, it was nearby towns, sending messengers requesting copies of Mirella's library decree, scribbled down on whatever paper they could find. A fisherman from the coast wrote, "We've got stories too. And a shed with decent walls. Can that be a library? Then came the travelers. A potter from the east arrived with clay shelves for book storage. A chorus of musicians passed through, offering to sing summaries of classic fables. Even a quiet witch from the mountains sent enchanted bookmarks that never lost your place. Soon, libraries were blooming in the unlikeliest places. A bakery in Windmere kept cookbooks on its windowsill and allowed anyone to borrow as long as they returned them with flour-free fingers. A village treehouse hosted weekly story hours narrated by the town's oldest grandmother, whose voice could hush a thunderstorm. Even a lighthouse became a library, each borrowed book wrapped in oilskin and tied with a seashell bookmark. Mirella kept a map on the library wall. She called it the Reading Realm. Each new library earned a pin: blue for new, green for thriving, gold for spectacular chaos. And in the center, her own, where it all began. The castle library never quieted again. The shelves were always moving, always breathing, always making space for new voices. No longer a secret, no longer a luxury. Books became like bread, necessary, shared, and warm in the right hands. Mirella, now simply librarian, walked the rows each day, helping children find their next adventure, helping old men remember ones they'd forgotten. She didn't wear a crown, but her hands were ink-stained. Her sleeves smelled of stories. And her legacy, it wasn't carved in stone. It was written on hearts. Years passed as they always do. Quietly at first, then all at once. The children grew. Lonnie became a teacher, strict but beloved, known for quizzing students mid-cookie. Halden, no longer a prince, but a passionate reader, opened a printing house dedicated to translating rare stories into everyday language. The library's cushions were replaced twice, the rule scroll updated 7 times, goats still banned, and Miss Ladderly retired with dignity after losing a wheel to overuse. Mirella stayed. Her hair turned silver at the temples. Her fingers curled more slowly around quills. But her eyes, sharp as ever, still scanned every new arrival like a treasure hunter in her own sea of ink. Then, one rainy morning, a visitor arrived. Just as the sun tried and failed to push through the clouds. She looked familiar. Not quite a child, not quite grown. Her hair was braided, her boots worn, and in her arms was a book wrapped in twine. She stood at the door, hesitant, then stepped inside. Mirella turned. The girl smiled. "You won't remember me," she said. "But once, you read me a story about a fox who stole a star." Mirella smiled back, slow and wide. "Of course I remember you. You left your drawing on the desk. It's still framed in the back." The girl, now nearly a woman, held out the book. "It's mine. My first. I wrote it." Mirella took it gently. Title was simple, beautiful. The Princess Who Became a Librarian. Inside, the dedication read, "For the one who made me believe." They sat together on the rug, opened the first page, and read aloud. 2 voices, one story echoing softly between the shelves. Because stories never truly end. They ripple forward, like stars planted in the sky for someone else to find.